Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. If you're watching this video and it's Salah time, please pause it and go pray and come back when you're done. Please check out the description section of this video to support the channel. With Donald Trump officially being inaugurated as a US president, many people are singing his praises in unison, as if all of the world's problems will be solved. Ironically, some of these voices also include pro-Palestinian people, most likely because Donald Trump took full credit for the January 19th, 2025 Israel-Palestine ceasefire agreement. But despite all the talk, most of us were sceptical given Israel's track record when it comes to breaching previous ceasefire agreements over the years. And like clockwork, Israel broke the ceasefire within hours of it going into effect, fatally harming yet more Palestinian children. Political scientist Dr. Norman Finkelstein predicted this on the day the ceasefire was announced and explained why both Trump and Netanyahu plotted this in the first place. Let's take a look.
This ceasefire agreement, I've of course read the agreement in the current situation. As you will recall, about a month ago, President Trump announced that if the hostages were not released at the time of his inauguration, there would be all hell to pay. Now, President Trump, he didn't want to begin his presidency by having to unleash a savage assault on Gaza. First of all, because the people of Gaza had already paid hell in the past 15 months. So there wasn't much more that he could do. And secondly, because he didn't want to begin his presidency on such a merciless, heartless note. And so he read the Riot Act, or his emissary read the Riot Act to Netanyahu, as in sign the agreement which apparently doesn't differ in any significant way from the agreement that was agreed to in May of this past year. And it ended. The lesson to be learned from there is when an American president says stop, it stops. All this talk about Americans having no power, that Netanyahu doesn't listen, and so on, it's just nonsense. Now, having said that, as you know, there are two components to the ceasefire. One is the mutual hostage exchange, the thousands of hostages that are being held by Israel versus the 100 or less hostages currently being held by Hamas. There is the hostage exchange, but there is also a second aspect. That is the promise of admitting humanitarian aid on a high level, they say, allowing for the reconstruction of Gaza and all the rest. For those who don't know the history, lifting the blockade of Gaza, allowing for the reconstruction of Gaza and all the rest, it was promised after Operation Cast Lead. It was promised after Israel assaulted the humanitarian flotilla, the Mavi Marmara. It was promised after Operation Pillar of Defense in 2012. It was promised after Operation Protective Edge in 2014, and nothing came of it. I think after the ceasefire and the mutual exchange of hostages between Israel and Hamas, all the promises about admitting humanitarian aid and allowing for the reconstruction in Gaza, all of that will vanish like snow in a spring sunshine. It won't happen.
As you saw, Mr. Finkelstein claimed that Donald Trump wanted a ceasefire in order to not taint the beginning of his presidency. This seems very plausible, as other presidents like Obama did the same thing with Israel when he came into office, and shortly afterwards let them resume their violent oppression of the Palestinians. Norman correctly stated that Trump got Netanyahu to sign a ceasefire agreement that Israel had previously rejected in May 2024. He also made the point that America has the power to stop Israel but choose not to, and I agree. It was reported that Trump has enacted a 90-day pause on the funding funding of foreign nations, which many Americans were quite happy about. However, the spoiler is that this pause of funding does not include Israel, who will continue to receive their $3.3 billion per year courtesy of the US taxpayer. Dr. Finkelstein also stated that the ceasefire agreement entails Israel releasing tens of thousands of Palestinian hostages that they have detained in inhumane conditions in exchange for the release of 94 Israeli hostages that Hamas have captive. I'm happy that hostages on both sides are being released, but I always found it quite condescending that Israel would go on about the release of their hostages, whilst at the same time having literally over 100 times more Palestinian hostages captive. Norman Finkelstein also claimed that this supposed ceasefire deal includes humanitarian aid being able to be provided to Gaza, which is going to be a difficult task with Trump cutting all funding to one of the biggest Palestinian aid agencies as soon as he entered office. Norman was right when he said these same promises have been made in the past in regards to previous ceasefires, and predictably over the decades, time after time, nothing came of it. Dr. Finkelstein predicts that after the hostage exchange, the ceasefire agreement will be breached. Well, as I showed you, already was breached, but I hope at the very least Israel waits until all the Palestinian hostages are released before they go full psycho again. And with Trump lifting the restrictions his predecessor Joe Biden had in place on the size of weapons that were permitted to be shipped to Israel, it looks like the devastation Israel will be capable of could potentially be worse than it was during the horrific Biden era. Here's a quick clip of Netanyahu admitting that the ceasefire is only temporary.
Since he was elected, Trump was completely committed to the release of the hostages. We spoke on Wednesday. He congratulated me on the agreement, and he emphasized, and rightly so, that the first stage is a temporary ceasefire. This is what he said, a temporary ceasefire. Towards the next stages of the agreement, we are holding on to some significant assets so that we can bring back all of the hostages, and in order to accomplish all the goals of the war. Both President Trump and President Biden have provided full backing to Israel's right to resume fighting, to resume combat, if Israel reaches the conclusion that the negotiations over the second stage are pointless. I truly appreciate that. I also appreciate the decision of President Trump to lift all the remaining restrictions on the providing of essential munitions and weapons to the State of Israel. If we need to resume combat, we will do so in new ways, and we will do so with tremendous force.
As you saw, the Israeli Prime Minister confidently made the claim that he has the full backing of Donald Trump to resume committing war crimes if and when he decides to. And this genocidal maniac was very happy to receive the supply of even more deadly weaponry than was previously available to him before Trump was in office. Let's look at what Trump had to say about it.
Confident are you, Mr. President, that you can keep the ceasefire in Gaza and conclude the three phases of this deal?
I'm not confident. That's not our war, it's their war, but I'm not confident, but I think they're very weakened on the other side.
Do you support the two-state?
Gaza, boy, I looked at a picture of Gaza. Gaza is like a massive demolition site. That place it's really got to be rebuilt in a different way.
Do you plan to help rebuilding Gaza?
I might. You know, Gaza is interesting. It's a phenomenal location. On the sea, best weather, you know, everything's good. It's like some beautiful things could be done with it, but it's very interesting. But some fantastic things could be done with Gaza.
How do you see the future in governance for Gaza?
Well, it depends. I can't imagine you could have, well, you certainly can't have the people that were there. Most of them are dead.
It's disgusting how Trump shrugged off the Israeli genocide of Palestine, labelling it Israel's war, not ours. Well, if it's Israel's war, why are you supplying them with funding and arms? And the way he spoke of Gaza as if it was a prime real estate location without expressing a shred of remorse for the tens of thousands of people that have been killed there shows he doesn't care about them at all. I'm not taken in by Trump. Yes, he may be better than Biden on a domestic level in the US in some ways, but it looks as if he could potentially be on par or even worse than Genocide Joe when it comes to the Middle East. Let's wait and see. Thank you for watching. Make sure to join my free Telegram group via the link in the description, where we as Muslims can speak freely and without censorship about issues like this. And remember to like, subscribe and become a channel member for access to exclusive content. Until next time, inshallah, Jazakallah khair.
Allahu Akbar, Allah.